Donald Trump was going to destroy the trade deficit. It's just exploded to a new 10-year high. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, the new numbers are out, and 2018 ended with a $621 billion deficit in goods and services between products that the United States sends overseas and products that we import from overseas. That is up $68.8 billion and is a new 10-year high. And Bill, you may think that the direction I'm going to go with this is to ask you why President Trump has screwed up so badly. But actually, I want to ask you why President Trump doesn't embrace the beauty of what he has actually done. Shouldn't he call off the war on globalism and declare victory?
Well, I'm not entirely sure how you get to that argument.
I'll get there.
Okay. Well, one of the things that like I say, one of the first things I try to do when I'm given a question like this is to find some sense of at least what is the general perspective of things. I was writing a comedy show in Florida called the Psychic News Network. It was a CNN parody, and they were going to tell us what the Dow Jones was going to be tomorrow, and it was going to be 1,750. I picked a number way above what it was. This is 1995, I guess.
Wow.
So one of the things we have to understand that as the balloon of the economy grows and more wealth is being generated in the United States, the size of the deficit will increase by the actual number will increase, but as a percentage, I'm not sure how big the increase is since the economy has grown so much. So that's just one thing just to keep in mind during the rest of this stuff. So, a trade deficit is it just, to be perfectly honest with you, Scott, our trade deficit doesn't worry me. What worries me is that money doesn't seem to mean anything anymore. And what I mean by that is that we now have a $25 trillion national debt. That's a lot more than $960 billion. It's, if you take $960 billion and multiply it by 10, you've got 9.6 trillion, not 25 trillion. It's a insanely big number. And when you get into these kind of debt levels, I'm no economist, which means I undoubtedly have insights on this issue. When you get to a debt level that is so high that everyone understands that it will never be repaid, ever. The idea of a government running enough surplus, in other words, taxing Americans, spending all the money they spend to do the services that the government needs, plus taxing them enough to pay down this debt. It's not going to happen. It's just not. So what does that mean? I have been told that the only way to understand this is that everybody knows the system is going to collapse at some point, and that point will be not when the lenders figure out that the country cannot repay the debt, because that happened a long time ago. Where the crisis will be is when can the country no longer make the payments on the debt? So imagine yourself that you're just a regular guy with a $40,000 a year income, let's say, and you get 4 credit cards at $10,000 each, and you immediately go out and put $40,000 worth of stuff on those credit cards. That's going to take a year's salary of everything you make. In fact, it's going to take more than that because the taxes are going to come out. So it's going to take years and years and years of you to pay this thing off. But the credit card companies don't really seem to mind that so long as you make the minimum monthly payments. And as the debt grows larger, those minimum monthly payments get larger too. They already consume billions and billions of dollars, might be hundreds of billions of dollars. I just don't remember the numbers offhand. And now you're talking about a country that is basically taking all of its cash to pay off debts and not buy anything new.
So I see the analogy you're making with the meaninglessness of money by looking at the national debt and the national deficit and basically saying, well, what difference does a trade deficit make? People can't even comprehend that. They don't even care about it anymore.
I don't say it doesn't make a difference. I'm just saying that in relationship to the scale of the other debt issues, it seems to me to be a relatively trivial number. But
so, and again, I am not actually criticizing this, or the questions that I'm asking aren't in critique of it. I guess my question is, why doesn't President Trump stand up and say, look, I've had an opportunity to be surrounded by some of the best economists and advisors in the world for the last 2 years. As you can see, our trade deficit has ballooned. But you know why that's happened? It's happened because of our tax cuts and because of our shrinking unemployment and growing employment and higher wages in this country, which has inspired Americans to go out and buy more stuff. A lot of that stuff that they buy is made overseas. And let's face it, we're in a global economy and things get made everywhere. Isn't it a beautiful thing that Americans can afford more? And that $621 billion, well, we paid that maybe in dollars, strong dollars, by the way. What we got was $621 worth, or $621 billion worth of goods and services.
Worth of stuff, yeah. No, it's an excellent argument. And I am unsure of whether or not all of the products of the information age are counted in things like the trade deficit. I know, for example, if we're importing iPhones, there's a trade deficit there in terms of the money that has to go out to get them made and stuff. But I simply don't know what the case is with things like the money generated by Amazon, let's say, or any of these other things, because we're turning more and more into a service economy. And I don't know how much of that is reflected in an actual trade balance where what we're really trading is information, and I just plain don't really know.
And it is a measure of goods and services. That's a good question to ask. Now, of course, any kind of government measure is not going to catch every dollar, but it is a measure of goods and services. Well,
so what you're basically, your point is, and it's an excellent point, is that a wealthy person individually now consumes more than they produce in terms of what they produce with their own hands. They're standing on the top of a very large pyramid that is producing a great deal of wealth. But yes, so on some level, a wealthy nation can afford to be buying stuff from other people because that's what you do with wealth, is you buy things to make your life better. That's actually an extremely good argument. The other part of the argument is that I think needs looking at is the idea, let's just take China because I'm sure that's where most of it is the idea that we're printing all this money, we're sending it to China, they're sending us stuff, and that somehow the Chinese economy is perfectly managed. Every single penny absolutely accounted for. No debt of their own, no graft, no corruption, no bubbles, no nothing. That is the image that they try very hard to project and maintain. But on some level, what you're talking about here is a trade bubble creating wealth in one country that goes then transfers to another country and creates a bit of a cash bubble on the other side. One nice thing about trading dollars for cars, Scott, is that the dollars can vaporize, but the car stays, and that's especially true. It's especially true for real estate. And if we are facing a period of inflation, and I mean hyperinflation, if the debt crisis happens, what we will see is what we've seen in every other history where people lose confidence in the future of their money. They immediately start charging more and more and more, and inflation rises and rises and rises. The people who get screwed under those circumstances are the people who've saved their money and done the right thing, while the government has spent their money and the money of their great-great-great-great-grandchildren unto the seventh generation. But the people who benefit from out-of-control rising inflation are people who buy a bunch of stuff early. And simply because while the dollar my dollar's purchasing power in a runaway economy, a runaway inflation, might be 1,000th of what it was last year. But if I bought the car last year, I got the car. So this all is extremely complicated, and I don't make any attempt to try and explain modern economics other than to say that the people that make these decisions are either much smarter than I am or much stupider. And when I say stupider than I am, what I mean is you cannot spend more than you make over time. Now, if it turns out that the world has changed to a degree that, well, certainly the complexity makes it look like this no longer makes sense. Nobody would continue to lend you money if you had $40,000 a year income and $22 million in credit card debt. Right?
Your implication about the Chinese economy brings up another excellent point, and a reason why you might say President Trump should walk away from this whole line of thinking where somehow the trade deficit is a problem for us. And that is, yes, China has a controlled economy, and many of their companies are partially owned by the government. The United States is not like that. In a very real sense, Bill, it could be said that we don't have a trade deficit because there is no we. There's no national trade deficit. It's your company and the guy down the street has another company. It's like saying my neighborhood has a trade deficit with Frisco, Texas down the street here, you know?
Yeah, that's right. And I was looking for, I was stumbling around it earlier when I was talking about whether there's things like, information technology, whether that is counted as part of the deficit. But what I was really getting at is this. The idea of a trade deficit strikes me as something that's a product of a second wave industrial era society whereby we make 100 million cars and we export 40 million cars and we import 60 million cars, and those are the cars going out and these are the cars coming in, and that's the traditional understanding of a trade deficit, I think, as most people understand it. But when you're talking about the fact that the information age economy is generating wealth not out of widgets made of stuff, not little steel boxes going one way or another, and more steel boxes are coming in than going out. When you deal with the fact that the value of the idea is where the wealth really is today, and you can just ask Jeff Bezos or Zuckerberg or any of these guys whether or not that's the case. The Uber, Lyft, all of these things. Then it becomes even less of an issue to me, because to me Uber is the most amazing example of how wealth is generated in the information age. Somebody came up with the idea to produce and I'm simplifying here, but I'm simplifying just to clarify the truth. Basically, somebody said, that guy needs a ride, that guy's got a car, needs some money, all we have to do is hook him up. And so for the price of an app and the support for it, but basically for no cost at all, they have revolutionized the way Americans move around in metropolitan areas. We talked about this just a couple days ago. And I forget what the exact valuation of Uber was. It was either $4 billion or $40 billion or something like that. And it's a perfect example because, Scotty, what Uber didn't do was Uber didn't say we need to have a fleet of cars out there to move Americans around, so we need to buy 4 million cars. The genius of Uber was the cars are there, the drivers are there, and the passengers are there, and the money is there. All we have to do is connect these things. So that is essentially an idea. It's not a tremendous capital outlay. You didn't have to build factories. You didn't have to hire hundreds of thousands of people. It's just an idea. And the idea generates so much money and moves, the velocity. It's moving dollars around. I pay the Uber guy. The Uber guy pays a guy who has an actual job, and then that actual job guy pays a BillWhittle.com membership, and all are happy. So it's created wealth essentially out of nothing. And there are no container ships that are measuring that value, but it's certainly value nevertheless.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the next time you get in an Uber to go somewhere, remember that part of the money you're giving to that driver is likely coming back around thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com.
This is an appropriate time for me to make a very quick point. For those of you that aren't members of BillWhittle.com, I would like to point out to you that by becoming a member and paying $9.95 a month, you are actually helping to lower your grocery bill, your gasoline bill. You're helping to lower all of these other bills. And the reason I say that is because since this program doesn't have any advertising, there are companies that are out there like Tide Detergent and Rice Krispies and so on that are not paying advertising money to me, which means they can pass the savings on to you. Everybody thinks television is free. Television is not free. It's expensive. And we're used to paying for it by the prices of the goods and services, what we would buy, with additional money tacked onto that product to pay for the advertising to advertise the product. See how it works? By not advertising the product, we are saving money from Budweiser, and therefore Budweiser can keep their prices lower. And I think that's something that we should be hailed for as champions.
Cutting out the middleman 5 days a week. This is Bill Whittle Now, brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. You can become one too. Just go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.